Hello everybody, I'm KC, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's celebrate Halloween this year by talking about Little Shop of Horrors. I love all kinds of musicals, but come Halloween, I have all sorts of soundtracks to fit the mood. Jekyll and Hyde, Nightmare Before Christmas, Frankenstein, Young Frankenstein. Yeah, my CD collection is weird. But the first in this trend of horror-themed musicals for me was Little Shop of Horrors. Little Shop and me go back a long way. I saw it when I was about 12 years old and absolutely loved it. Now, I'm one of those people who tends to get pretty obsessive with something I love after I discover it, and typically I try to learn as much as I can about it. Which was great in this case because Little Shop of Horrors does have an interesting, if not rather unusual, history. The 1986 movie was adapted from the off-Broadway musical from 1982 of the same name, which itself was adapted from a low-budget film from 1960, which was directed by, get this, Roger Corman. But for the most part, we'll be focusing on the 1986 version in this video. The story revolves around Seymour Krelborn, a meek and pathetic man who works at a rundown flower shop with his secret crush Audrey, and his overbearing employer and sort of adopted father, Mr. Mushnick. Seymour is able to bring in some big business when he displays a strange and interesting plant he had discovered, but he soon finds out that the plant is more than it seems and needs to be fed blood in order to survive and continue to bring Seymour success. We'll go more into this later, but that's the basic premise. Yeah, it's a really weird setup, but it works surprisingly well. I know very few people who don't like Little Shop, but watching it again, I realized that this movie would likely not have been as successful if it came out today. The movie has a lot of things that people tend to raise an eyebrow at about movie adaptations, especially of beloved properties like the musical was becoming. For one, it's a very star-focused cast. Out of the 5 main characters, 3 of them are played by, at the time, big-name actors. Nowadays, that would immediately cause controversy, but the casting is excellent, and there's not a weak performance to be found. Rick Moranis was a perfect choice for Seymour. He just fits the role in pretty much every way. And while some have criticized that his singing is weak because, well, it is, I would argue that that works in his favor, and fits Seymour's timid demeanor that pretty much defines his character. And hey, give Moranis some credit for being able to keep up with actually trained, very talented singers. But the thing that probably would have raised the most eyebrows would be the choice to cast Steve Martin as Orin Scrivello. While I can't speak for the audiences of the 80s, this probably would have raised some questions nowadays. Orin may be the most underrated musical villain out there, at least in my opinion, and let's face it, Martin doesn't exactly scream menacing. But you know what? It works. It works really, really well. From the second he shows up on screen, Martin just gives off such a joyous, maniacal energy as he sings about how fun it is to rip out people's teeth. It's disturbing, but in a fun way. He completely loses himself in the role, and it's hard not to enjoy it. And it's not just through his song. Martin keeps up this intimidating yet comedic charm of the character all throughout. He doesn't spend much time in the movie, all things considered, but he makes the most of every second. He has some great moments with Rick Moranis, and it's nice to know that this would not be the last time they would work together. Besides Moranis and Martin, and Vincent Gardenia, who plays Mr. Mushnick, there's also a lot of surprising cameos. Huge comedic names at the time pop up all over the place in this movie, including Christopher Guest, Jim Belushi, John Candy, and even Bill Murray. Oh gee, I wonder how they possibly got him to be in the movie. While this is a bit strange at first, it's not as distracting as some other movies out there that have tons of cameos, and they all make the most of their screen time. Bill Murray in particular participates in a great comedic scene with Steve Martin that literally stops the movie in its tracks. This is right after the reveal of what Audrey 2 is. It has no relevance to anything. It just comes in, interrupts the movie for 4 minutes, and then ends. But nobody cares. This is one of the most famous scenes in the movie. People love it. This is a movie that makes the most of its talent and knows how to use it properly to entertain, and not just with the celebrities. Beyond the celebrity casting, the movie did pull a smart move by having Ellen Greene reprise her role as Audrey. She played Audrey in the stage version, and it makes perfect sense why they asked her to come back. Most people, including myself, really only know Ellen Greene from this movie or the musical, but it's a wonderful introduction. This woman is insanely talented, and it's so clever how that talent is hidden under the quiet, mousy persona she has through most of the movie, only to be revealed what she's truly capable of during arguably the movie's most memorable song as her character reaches her apex. Some people think that this was the first time a Broadway performer reprised their role for the movie version, and while that's not true, it's certainly a rarity, and I commend the filmmakers for taking such a risk on what is already a risky property to adapt. Again, this isn't unheard of, even today, but still rare. Something else that may not have gone over well today is how much was changed for the movie version. Not so much the script, that largely stays the same, with a few exceptions we'll go more into later, but the songs. Now yes, every musical that's ever been adapted to the big screen has had a few songs cut from the film version, which makes sense. Changes like that have to be made in order to fit the new structure. But Little Shop got the axe worse than Orin here did. In total, 5 songs were cut from the movie. While I do think it would have been fine if they kept some of the songs that didn't make it, I do understand a lot of the cuts they did make. Though the person who suffers the most from these cuts is Vincent Gardenia, since none of the songs Mr. Mushnick takes part in made it into the movie. It's really a shame because Vincent Gardenia had a great singing voice and he never gets to show it off, despite his character getting a lot more to do in the stage version. But aside from that, the best things about this movie are the songs and the production value. And since most of the time they go hand in hand, let's go over some of the highlights together. The songs were written by Alan Menken and the late great Howard Ashman, who you may know as the team responsible for some of the songs of some of the most well-acclaimed movies of the Disney Renaissance. These guys rarely fail at delivering a great soundtrack, and since Little Shop was very much a passion project for them, this was no exception. The opening number introduces us to Crystal, Ronette, and Chiffon, who kind of serve as the omnipresent backup singers for the entire movie. They barely interact with the other characters and have nothing to do with the story, but they add a lot of style to the movie and flair to the songs, and set up the tone for what's to come. The songs would be a lot less fun without them. Kinda like the muses from Hercules.
He was a kid with his act down pat. Zero the hero in no time flat. Zero the hero just like that.
Then there's Skid Row, a song that wonderfully sets up our characters' turmoils and conflicts and the environment the story takes place in, while at the same time managing to be catchy and even funny. This combination of a dark, grimy environment with the glitz and glam that comes with a show tune is something else other movie musicals have tried, but typically don't succeed in. But it really works here. You still get the sense that this place is the lowest of the low, but they manage to blend it with the polished fantasy that typically comes with a musical very well. And while we already talked about Ellen Greene's singing chops, I do want to mention Somewhere That's Green. Skid Row may have helped us understand Audrey a bit better, but Somewhere That's Green is a very sweet song that presents everything we need to know about Audrey. Her struggles, her dreams, and that she truly loves Seymour. Remember that, it'll be important later. It's probably the most low-key song in the movie, but it does its job very well. Then it's immediately followed by the worst song in the movie. You can tell because no one remembers it. Now let's get to the real good stuff. The first song to have Audrey 2 finally show his true colors is Feed Me. Or is it her true colors? You know, this is an age-old discussion on what exactly Audrey 2's gender is, and that's a hole I am not going to crawl down, so we're just going to stick with it. For the rest of the video, it's an it. Okay? Good. This is where the plot really kicks in and our somewhat Faustian elements come in, as Audrey 2 convinces Seymour to attempt to kill people so he can keep feeding it blood, with the promising rewards of love, fame, and the purposely overlooked hentai joke. While the song is another great addition, and the casting of Four Tops lead singer Levi Stubbs was an excellent choice, the best thing about Audrey 2's scenes is the gorgeous puppet work. Audrey 2 was brought to life through purely practical effects and puppetry, which, as a kid who grew up during the boom of CGI, was astonishing to me when I first saw the models on the DVD bonus features. But it's no surprise given that the movie was directed by Jim Henson Company alum Frank Oz, and he brought a lot of his buddies onto the movie to help bring this cosmic chrysanthemum to life. They went all out with making Audrey 2 look and move as fluently and realistically as possible in all of its forms, and it shows. There were dozens of puppeteers operating this thing, and they even went so far as to slow down the frame rate they were shooting the movie at just so the lip syncing would match up perfectly.
You don't know what you're fucking. You got no idea. You don't know
messing with. You got no idea. You don't know what you're looking at when you're looking here.
Well, that's enough gushing about Audrey 2 for now. Let's move on to gushing about Audrey 1 and take another look at Suddenly Seymour. This is arguably the most beloved song from the musical, and I gotta admit, it's my favorite too. It's wonderfully composed, beautifully performed, Rick Moranis and Ellen Greene knock it out of the park, and it's such a great payoff to see these two finally get together. It's no wonder it's hands down the most popular song, because if you get Alan Menken to compose your musical, then by God, the love song is going to be the most recited and remembered of the bunch. It's even rumored that the song could have been a big radio hit if Ashman and Menken were willing to change it to Suddenly Someone, to make it more relatable. But they decided to keep it the way it was, and they clearly didn't need the extra airtime to make this song memorable. The song that follows it, Supper Time, may be the most suspenseful song in the movie as Audrey 2 tries to convince Seymour to feed him Mr. Mushneck after he gets a little too close to the truth. The girl singing this one verse in the background over and over is almost haunting, and it's brilliantly shot as well. Not much else to say, it's a fairly short scene after all, but it's one of my favorites. Now that we've talked about the rest of the movie, let's talk about the ending. But this is where things are going to get complicated. Most of you probably already know this, but there are actually two endings to this movie. The original ending is pretty much exactly what you get in the stage show, but test audiences didn't really respond well to it, so they changed the ending drastically to please audiences, but deviated greatly from the source material in the process. The change to the ending is the most controversial thing in the entire movie. So to fully understand what each of the two endings represent, let's go over them individually. In the original ending, Audrey is attacked by Audrey 2, and her wounds from the plant turn out to be fatal. When Seymour tells her what the plant really is, her last wish is for Seymour to give her to the plant so it can continue to bring Seymour success and happiness. And Audrey dies in his arms after singing a beautifully heartbreaking reprise of Somewhere That's Green. That has the most clever, yet horribly ironic twist on a reprise I have ever heard in my freaking life. Seymour grants Audrey's last wish and gracefully feeds her to the plant. It's a beautiful and poignant scene that makes Seymour regret his actions more than anything. Seymour then proceeds to race to the top of a building and tries to commit suicide. Seriously. But he's stopped by a marketing exec who was also on the roof, for some reason, and tells him his plan to sell versions of Audrey 2 all over the country. Hearing this, Seymour confronts the botany behemoth from outer space, but winds up getting eaten himself, and Audrey 2's plan succeeds. The movie ends with the song Don't Feed the Plants, as tons of alien plants rip New York apart with some of the most well-done practical puppetry I have ever seen. There are tons of really creative things going on in this final sequence, even though it goes on way too long. I did like Audrey 2 actually bursting through the movie screen at the end. That was a nice touch. So we have an emotional payoff, a strong cautionary message about the consequences of giving into greed and pressure, and astonishing practical effects that pay homage to other B-horror movies to end with. But apparently, during its first screening, the audience responded very negatively to the fact that Audrey and Seymour died and the plants won. So because they already spent a lot of money on this movie, despite the fact that the effects during the original ending reportedly took up 1/5 of the movie's total budget, they had to change the ending. In the new ending, Audrey survives and is able to get around just fine while still having what were previously fatal wounds. Seymour and Audrey discover the plan to sell replicas of Audrey 2 across the country, and Seymour has decided that enough is enough and goes to confront Audrey 2. The final confrontation is more or less the same in both versions, but when I talked about the original ending, I didn't really mention Mean Green Mother from Outer Space, which is Audrey 2's big song during the final conflict. This song was written specifically for the movie, and fans speculate that the only reason it was included was to make the movie eligible for an Academy Award. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but I actually think the song fits really well in the movie. Honestly, the final confrontation between these two in the stage version is really lame, and is barely a minute long. And while that works for the stage show, especially since they have Don't Feed the Plants for their climax, I personally really like Mean Green Mother, and think it fits much better for a movie climax. It's a great villain song and is further proof of how marvelous the puppet work is, since this is a song that gives Audrey 2 backup singers. Plus, this song probably worked really well in their favor when the team had to cut Don't Feed the Plants. But instead of Audrey 2 winning the struggle, this time Seymour is able to blow it up by electrocuting it with a loose wire somehow, and he and Audrey live happily ever after. When it comes to these endings, there seems to be no majority consensus among fans. Some people hate the new ending and wish they stuck with the original, some people prefer the new ending, and some like the story either way. And that's kind of where I fall. Watching the original ending again as an adult, I've certainly come to respect and admire it for what it tried and, for the most part, succeeded in doing. But I do think the new ending is a bit better than some people give it credit for. Yes, the whole deal with the devil story and the consequences of Seymour's actions are stronger in the original ending, but I don't think it's lost in the new ending. To me, Seymour doesn't seem like the typical protagonist that comes with a story like this. Sure, he does become incredibly successful because he fed the plant, but he never enjoys it. Not for a second. The only thing he ever won out of this was Audrey, and even before the change in ending, it was clear that he didn't need that to get her. We saw in Somewhere That's Green that Audrey had always loved Seymour. She didn't care if he was rich or famous, she thought he was great the way he was. Which, by the way, is why her final wish in the original ending is as devastating as it is. And while losing Audrey sends him into a spiraling depression that leads to his own demise, almost losing Audrey is enough to snap him out of his insecurities and end what he started. That is the moment he realizes that he can't let more innocent people get hurt. And that's exactly what will happen if he keeps letting people, or in this case an alien plant, walk all over him. It's a growing point for his character that the original didn't really give him. You could argue that he did what he did because he started to think the reward was greater than the cost. But when he almost loses Audrey and immediately finds out Audrey 2's grand plan, he realizes that that's far from the case. Despite what he thought before, none of those people deserve to die. And instead of whining and being racked with guilt like he's been doing through the whole movie, he decides to take responsibility for his actions and finish what he started. I know some people aren't fond of it, but I do kind of like Seymour's revelation. And hey, the new ending doesn't let them off completely scot-free. They have that suspicious little plant in their garden. A real classic horror movie cliffhanger, right? I don't know. I guess in the end, it just depends on what you prefer. Someone who is so consumed by their actions that they aren't able to stop the monster they create and suffer the consequences for it as others fall for the same trap, or someone who learns from their mistakes before it's too late and rises to the occasion to fix them before they hurt anyone else. I personally can see merit in both of them, and while I respect the original ending greatly, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a soft spot for the new one. It is the one I grew up with. Back to our earlier point, would they have kept the original ending in there if this movie came out today? Probably, definitely, yes. But would it have appealed so well to movie-going audiences as it does now with the new ending? Hard to say, but I guess we'll never know for sure. There are a lot of different opinions on this matter, but this is just mine. But I will say that both of these endings could have been avoided, and Seymour and Audrey could have made it out without a scratch if Seymour hadn't tried to leave through the front door and just used the back door to the flower shop we clearly saw him use. How long was it? 15 minutes ago. I'm just saying, this 3-page discussion on how this movie ends could have been avoided if he took the back way we saw him use, what was it again, 15 minutes ago. Again, I'm just saying. Overall, Little Shop of Horrors is hilarious and bizarre, but it's a strong film that manages to have a silly premise with a story as old as time, and doesn't shy away from getting the audience emotionally invested. It does all sorts of things that recent adaptations have done, but manages to pull it off gracefully, and is able to appeal to hardcore fans and casual viewers. This was a group of very talented people, and they put every drop of talent they had into this strange little project. A director's cut of the movie was released a couple of years ago with the original ending fully restored, so if you preferred that over the happy ending, which is nowhere to be found on this disc, get it if you haven't already. Little Shop of Horrors is a bizarre and wildly entertaining tragic comedy that holds a special place in my heart, especially around this time of year. Happy Halloween, everybody, and remember, don't feed the plants.